I knew the powers of government, so when I was in local office, I knew that I could not keep a diary because it could be subpoenaed in any political controversy which I might face. And of course, I was subpoenaed for my role in assisting President Reagan's policies in Central America. And my driver, for example, was interviewed for 6 hours by lawyers from 2 congressional committees in Switzerland. My driver, which gives you an idea of the intensity of it. So I didn't have any notes, so Tom had to reconstruct everything from people's memories, and it was an enormous project. But thank you, Tom, very, very much. And I would like to thank Catherine Lanahan for the president. Where is she? Back. Oh, thank you very much. I used to be a member long ago, but
You still are.
I still am. Thank you. And also Ronnie Pearl for making this possible. Thank you, and my dear friend Jane Hemingway Sullivan. And Susan Graff, a very glamorous fashion plate, Susan Graff, my assistant in Bern. And also a young lady who worked for me several years ago, but she's here with her 9-year-old daughter, Ann Yoakum. Where's Ann? Beautiful lady, daughter Rosemary. And my cousin, by marriage, Dal Spencer, right here. And if you read the book in the Chinese portion, I had a life in public diplomacy in China, and it's because of my connection to the Whittlesey family. And both Dow and I married into the Whittlesey family, who were Presbyterian missionaries in China for many years. And also Father Mike Riley is here, who's the principal of St. Joseph's by the Sea in Staten Island. And I also want to recognize one of your great patrons here, who is also a very dear friend of mine for many, many years. We've had hours and hours of political conversation. She did her PhD in Geneva, and always, when I came to her house, which is fairly frequently, we literally talked for hours. Your great patroness, Mrs. Shelby Cullum Davis. Just turned 106, and is actually failing, but we should all pray for her. I also wanted to thank Michael Reagan, who wrote the foreword to this book. He's a really fine young man, and one of, the most loyal of Reagan's children to his father's legacy. And I appreciate it very much that he would be willing to write the foreword. I just got this in the mail this week. I got a lot of these. I'm sure you do too. It's titled, "What Would Reagan Do?" And it's a talk by a scholar in California, who I've heard of. He's on Fox News. Ronald Reagan deconstructed the political landscape in the United States. He busted it up, the old political landscape, and he reconfigured it. And he made his version of conservatism mainstream. And I was looking at the New York Times, which I read usually every day just to see what they're up to. And this week, they're accusing the Republican Party of veering off the mainstream. Of course, the big debate in politics is always, what is the mainstream? What constitutes the mainstream? And Ronald Reagan had a view about that. And it was a view that appealed to me early on in my life, I read voraciously. I used to be a Democrat when I was in college. My professors convinced me of that. And then when I got to law school, I couldn't get a job because we were told women would not be hired. I was a graduate of Penn Law School. And don't bother to come to the interviews, dear, you will not be hired. So I taught in a Blackboard jungle school in South Philadelphia. And some of my liberal notions were really tested. And then I got a job as a government lawyer working for the state in the Department of Public Welfare and I was given the cases that no man would take. All the men avoided, which was working in family court. And it was an eye-opening experience. I saw firsthand the breakdown, the collapse of the family structure. And I knew what Ronald Reagan meant when he talked about morally ordered liberty and the importance of the family. So I married and had children. My husband taught me about politics, really. It was his hobby. He was in the advertising business. He was asked to run, not I. And when he turned it down, I said sheepishly, dear, do you think I could run if you don't want to for this seat? They had asked him. Well, he said he had to think about it for about 3 days. And then he jumped in, and I was running against 6 men in a safe Republican seat, so the primary was the general election. And I was also pregnant in a Catholic district. And I was told by one of the leaders of the Republicans in the Pennsylvania House, but by being pregnant, I had lost the seat already. But we were undeterred, and with my husband's help, I went out and knocked on 60,000 doors. We did nothing else. And delivered my son, and won with about 50% of the vote. So, the issues then were women's issues. The ERA had already passed in Pennsylvania. They were economic issues, really. I was a fiscal conservative. And the concern about excessive government spending was just starting, really. And those were my positions. I also read about foreign policy. I started reading Human Events and National Review. And I had traveled in Europe as a student and learned to be a fairly good German speaker in my youth, and was fascinated by the culture of Europe, the castles, the music, the food. I was in Austria and Germany and Switzerland. And so in those days, German and French were the choices in foreign languages in public schools, and I chose German. Now, I don't think the choices, I think German has disappeared into memory. And but then it was very common in American schools to study German, which is what I did. And in college, I had wonderful German professors and teachers. Before I went to college, I also sang and danced in musical comedy in high school, and did a lot of things, other things than study. And I worked in a musical theater outside of Niagara Falls called one of the theaters in the Round. And I was an intern. I was 17 years old. And we worked in musicals, all the different musicals that played through the season there. And one of them that played was Call Me Madam. I don't know if you know that. It's the story of an American woman who becomes a political appointee in a small European country. And I was very thrilled to get the role of the maid in that musical. Never dreaming that one day who knew that one day I would be the man. But I did, and then I went to Penn Law School on a full tuition scholarship, for which I'm eternally grateful. Also Wells College, full tuition scholarship, my undergraduate days. And then in Philadelphia, my husband taught me about big city machine politics. And I am Irish by heritage, so it's kind of, as the Germans say, Fingerspitzengefühl. It's in the fingers. The Irish in politics, so I didn't need much introduction. The political leader, otherwise known as the boss of Philadelphia, was Irish. He took me under his wing. He taught me. I learned from him and my husband. Then my husband decided we were leaving and moving to a suburban county after working for Nixon. My husband actually was my late husband was executive director of Nixon, the Nixon campaign in Pennsylvania. So we moved to the big, powerful Republican county, bigger than 5 states of the Union, one of the last remaining Republican machines in the nation. And my late husband, who was by that time really a pro, knocked politely on the door of the big boss and said, "I would really like to help you." Door slammed in his face. They didn't want any newcomers. They were firmly in power. Well, in about a year and a half, they were defeated, and I was sitting in a seat. And my biggest achievement in Delaware, in that part of Pennsylvania, was the fact that I tried to bring the Republican Party, make it strong, and make it a party of ideas, not just fixing parking tickets and standard political patronage, although I did that too. We had to. It was, I felt like I was running a constant employment agency as a county commissioner. But I was able to, in the old political jargon, deliver the county to Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan was ferociously opposed. He was anti-establishment. He wore brown suits. He wasn't very intelligent. He went to some place called Eureka College that no one ever heard of. And no one wanted him. I had read and read voraciously, and I got a sense that he was the man of the future. So I supported Ronald Reagan. And when I went to the convention in 1976, I and my 5 Delaware County delegates, by then firmly in my grip as the party leader, behind the scenes, no official title, we held out for Ronald Reagan through the vote on 16C, the historic vote, which enabled Ford eventually to win. Reagan lost the vote on 16C, and then he conceded to Ford. But I was in deep trouble in Pennsylvania. I was not controllable. So I campaigned for Ford. Ford won lost Pennsylvania by 125,000 votes. I had advised the campaign, Jim Baker was then, I met Jim Baker, not to spend time where they were spending it, but to go out into the big vote-rich suburbs and build up the vote totals there. They didn't pay any attention to me. Who was I? Anyway, Ford lost by 125,000 votes. 4 years later, Ronald Reagan won Pennsylvania by 350,000 votes. So Pennsylvania is not lost as a blue state, but we made a huge effort to woo Democrats. Ronald Reagan in 1980 got 27%. 27% of the Democratic vote went to Ronald Reagan. You know what Romney got? 7%. So Reagan put together a very powerful political coalition, a unique and powerful political coalition. And it consisted of the people who wanted not to just contain the Soviet Union, but defeat it. Right. And that was the difference. The establishment talked about détente. They thought Ronald Reagan was a warmonger and was going to start World War III. They were content to contain it. Ronald Reagan saw the indirect aggression of the Soviet Union during the 70s. They won over 10 countries by indirect aggression. And he called it what it was, an evil empire, and he wanted to defeat it. And all of these ethnic people in the big cities, and throughout the Midwest in particular, in the Northeast, many of them were Polish, Ukrainian, Hungarian, Bulgarian. They'd always been Democrats, but they hated the Soviet Union. They knew it truly was an evil empire because many of them had relatives there who suffered. So they all of a sudden switched and they started flocking to Ronald Reagan. A lady tonight came to me who's from the Baltic states. Ronald Reagan loved the Baltic people. He wanted them to be free. They were under Soviet oppression. And the cheering for Ronald Reagan from the Baltic reception that we had in the White House could have been heard all the way down Pennsylvania Avenue. So, and then there were the economic conservatives that were concerned about excessive spending, and Ronald Reagan believed in smaller government. He really believed that. And there were also the social conservatives. And Roe versus Wade had been passed in 1972. And many people said, I didn't believe the Democratic Party left me, because many of the former Democrats who believed in the sanctity of human life left the Democratic Party when it became aggressively pro-choice and flocked to Ronald Reagan. That wasn't the only subject. School prayer was an issue. Many people believed that the Supreme Court decisions banning prayer had an adverse effect upon children in the United States, and the large prison population that we have now, the largest in the world, unfortunately. And the Equal Rights Amendment, which many predicted at the time would lead to, guess what? Women in combat. And guess where we are today? One of the things that was feared. But anyway, these were the three pillars of his political legacy. And today, when they write these things, what would Reagan do? There's a lot of historical revisionism going on. And they tend to downplay parts of Reagan's legacy that they don't like today. And some of the same issues are in the forefront. The NRA members, huge number of people who believe in the Second Amendment, by the way, which comes from the Swiss, they endorsed Ronald Reagan. He won huge majorities in states that would otherwise have been Democrat. And all the labor people all go hunting. They have guns. They love to keep their guns and their gun rights secure. And Ronald Reagan, that was one of Ronald Reagan's main constituencies. So we can debate what happened to that powerful coalition. Something has happened, obviously. The word conservative has had a changed meaning, which has alienated many people. A political pundit told me that 3 to 4 million conservatives stayed home in the last election. 3 to 4 million. So I think we need to do a little careful analysis of our national party, or I fear we go the way of the Whigs, to be quite blunt. I was privileged to work for him. He had a sunny disposition. He was always asking me for jokes. He wanted to know if I had any jokes for him, new jokes. And I did. I tried. I asked everybody. And one of the jokes I got from the Swiss Foreign State Secretary, I said, I'm going, back to the White House. Do you have any jokes? And I'll tell it to you because Ronald Reagan told it. There was a French dog and a Polish dog and a Soviet dog, and they were together in a kennel. And the dogs were discussing their lives, and the French dog said, when I want meat, I just bark and I get my meat. And the Polish dog looked puzzled and said, what's barking? And the Soviet dog said, oh, what's meat? He used humor. He used humor very effectively, and I don't think there's been a president since, actually, who has used humor as he did. He could have been a stand-up comedian in his own right, and he did have bad days, however, when that seemed to have disappeared, but like every one of us. But he could entertain people easily with his jokes and one-liners, but they usually had a political purpose. Like the joke he told about, the stories he told about the Soviet Union, and in closing I'll tell you just this last one. He believed the Soviet Union, the battle with the Soviet Union was a spiritual struggle. He actually told that to the Swiss president with whom I was dancing when they met in Geneva, but I don't think it appeared in the State Department notes, that human rights are rights that come to us from God. And we believe that in the West. And they are therefore unalienable. And the Swiss president, who was a devout Catholic, that one at the time, said, yes, in the Soviet Union and in the other systems, they believe that human rights are privileges conferred by the state. And so Ronald Reagan understood it was a spiritual struggle with a materialistic, atheistic power which had persecuted religious people. Lenin, as you may know, ordered the execution of 8,000 priests in one day. And it continues today. The people persecuted in the People's Republic of China are Christian pastors and Catholic priests and Tibetan monks. Communist systems always have as their first order of business first of all, taking the guns within 24 hours. The countries must be disarmed on pain of death. And secondly, killing all the priests and the pastors. And they did that in Central America. We had at our White House meetings some of the indigenous Indians who had been Christianized by American missionaries who from central Pennsylvania, actually, who went down there, and they were all Protestant believers. And one of them came to the White House and they had sliced off his ear. And President Reagan arranged for him to have plastic surgery to have his ear removed. But that was what they did to him because he had failed to join the Sandinista so-called agrarian reform movement in Nicaragua. But Ronald Reagan understood it was a spiritual struggle, and that also it produced only misery, as socialism does it. There isn't one country in the world in which a strong central government has ever produced healthier, wealthier people. It just doesn't exist. And in fact, in most of these countries, there was just extended misery. So he told this joke, which I will leave you with, to make his points about socialism and the spiritual struggle in which we were engaged with the evil empire. By the way, the establishment didn't like that either. That was terrible, calling it the evil empire. He really got taken to the doghouse on that one, over and over and over again. But I can tell you some former Czech political prisoners came to me in Bern, Switzerland, with the little pieces of paper, former Czech political prisoners, where they had the words of his speeches written on little pieces of paper, which had sustained them while they were in prison. They knew it was a spiritual struggle. Anyway, this is one of Ronald Reagan's jokes, which he told to make these points. It's as follows. The Soviet agricultural commissar went down to visit one of his collective farms to see the manager and to inquire about the production. And he asked him first about the apple crop. And the farm manager, the collective farm manager, said, "Oh, sir, the apples are better than ever. We have bushels and bushels of apples." And then he said, "Well, I'd like to know about the corn production in this farm." "Oh," he said, "sir, the corn harvest is better than ever this year, better than any farm in the district. We have really excelled with our corn production." And the commissar looked very pleased and said, "And then tell me, please, about your production of potatoes." And the manager looked up and said, "Sir, Mr. Commissar, the potato crop is so plentiful that it reaches the foot of God." And the Soviet commissar looked startled and said, "But this is Soviet Union, there is no God." And the farm manager replies, "There are no potatoes either."
So get your questions ready, everyone.